Okay, and so I'm Deana, 1N Deana versus 2N Deana, who's helping to run the environment for us today. So I'm Deana Namuth Covert, and I'd like to welcome you to our second series, or second seminar in the TCAP series. And TCAP stands for TCAP, and it's a US-funded research extension education project. And we've been doing some webinar series through that. It looks like all of you have filled out our poll, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results and then close it. So I think now, can all of you see what the results are? I know my screen's a little bit different than yours. You can type in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner there. So you should see, oh good, okay, Amy can see that. So it looks like 2/3 of you found out about this webinar through our TCAP email, so you would know about it. A couple through just your department, and then one of you found it from somewhere else. So that's pretty cool. That person that found it somewhere else, if you wouldn't mind, I'd be curious where you found it. If you could type that in the chat box. And I'll go ahead and hide this poll. This is just an example. Oh, Amy's somewhere else. Her boss told her, and I'm her boss, so that's kind of funny. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. What I'm going to try to do with today's webinar is demonstrate some of the tools and how we can do some interactivity here online. Let me go ahead and move this one. Okay, so the title of our talk then today is the Cyberspace, using new frontiers in learning and networking. So what I'm hoping to go through today, kind of the plan, is first of all to take a look at what are some of the advances that have been made in education and the tools and research. So, you know, a lot of us work in science research, but it turns out that there's also equal advances being made in education. We're learning more about how people learn and how we can create materials that help them learn even better. What we'll do after going through a little bit of the research, and then we'll also look at the Plant and Soil Science elibrary. It's just a case study. And that is the environment in which this webinar is being delivered today. So I'll give you a little bit of a tour of that. And then lastly, we'll spend some time looking at some future projects we're working on and even some ideas that you guys may have as well. All right, so let me go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, so on this next slide here, this is a picture of Carol Twigg. And Carol is a well-known researcher in the area of distance education. And I heard a talk that she did a few years ago about distance ed. And some of the advice that she had for us as researchers was, first of all, to stop doing research to determine if learning can take place online or not. What she was pointing out is that a lot of research had already been done and had shown that it was true that, in fact, you could learn online just as well as you could in a traditional face-to-face classroom. And what she was really encouraging us to do is to go deeper and figure out how can we make that learning even better. You know, look at learning styles, look at paths in which students learn, look at specific tools to make that even better. So I thought that was interesting because a lot of us that aren't really well known, don't know the education research as well, didn't realize that, okay, that's already been well established. And even some critics of distance ed will bring up that question and say that they don't know that you can learn online as well as you can face-to-face. But it is true. You can learn online just as well. The second thing that she was talking about is she encouraged us to move the ATM machine. Okay, so the ATM machine, for those of you who may be coming from other countries and aren't aware of that, that's like a bank that's out of a machine. So you don't have to actually go and see the person, but you can just get money from the bank. So she used this analogy with the ATM machine that when those first came out, that it turns out people didn't want to use the ATM machines. Okay? And the reason why is when an ATM machine first came out, they were in fact located inside of a bank. So this is a picture of, I just pulled this off of Google, but you can see that where this red arrow is here, the ATM machine is actually located inside of the bank. Well, that makes sense that people wouldn't want to use it, because if you're going to the bother to actually go to the bank, you're going to meet with a real person. So she said what happened is once people got the idea of let's move the technology, move the ATM machine out of the bank and into places like here, so maybe just on the street corner, maybe inside of a shopping mall, or here in the US where we all use cars, you want to drive up ATM machine, or maybe in the airport, or this one here, this one cracks me up that I found on the internet. It looks like it's just this movable trailer that's not hooked to anything. It's actually an ATM machine. So Carol's idea was, once the ATM machine technology got out of the bank and used in other ways, then that's when it became really popular and really utilized a lot. Okay, so what do you think she meant when she was suggesting to all of us that were attending the conference then that we need to move the ATM machine out of the bank? What would be that analogy, or what was she trying to encourage us to do as far as education goes? I'm curious to see what some of your ideas might be. So feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box, and we'll look at a couple of comments people may have. Okay, anybody have ideas? We need to not tie to physical space in university. That's what Jamie was suggesting. Yeah, so just like the ATM machine was physically located in the bank, we need to not tie our online technology only to an on-campus environment. Okay, Pravin, tell me a little bit more. What do you mean by to create a job? I'll give you a second to type in. A person could get a job in place of the ATM machine. Yep. So are you saying that the ATM machines got rid of jobs? Or are you saying that you create jobs because you've created the ATM machines? Okay, well, while Pravin's going to type in his response there. So, I think what, Carol was saying is we need to kind of think in different modes. I think a lot of times what we do at distance ed is we take this environment or this way that we're used to teaching, like in a big classroom, and all we're doing is recreating it here online. So like on the classroom setting over here, we have one person talking to a lot of people, but these people that are sitting out here really aren't interacting with the person talking that much. And then similarly online, sometimes we create environments here where maybe we have a voice over PowerPoint or some activities, but all the people that are out here interacting with it still aren't interacting with each other or with the speaker. So she was kind of challenging us to think of ways and how we can harness this new technology to teach in completely different ways than we've done before. So what we're going to look at is this Plant and Soil Science elibrary and how we're trying to take stabs at trying to do that, trying to create an environment that helps us do things that we couldn't do on campus or in a live kind of setting. So this is the URL address in case some of you maybe don't have that. Just passel.unl.edu. PASSL just stands for Plant and Soil Science eLibrary. I'm going to go through a few screenshots here to kind of walk you through a little bit of the environment in case you're not familiar with that. Some of the statistics, first of all, this is a project that we've had going here at the University of Nebraska since 1999, so for several years. We've won some awards. It's grant funded, and the grants have come from the U.S. federal government, from industry support, the National Science Foundation, and then just any other kind of collaborations. So far to date, and I don't know that my statistics are exactly up to date, but we have at least 12 U.S. and international universities that are working together to develop content and to use the resources. We have 4 industry partners, like some companies that are working with us. We have almost 130 separate lessons that are in the site. 11 of those are in Spanish. And then a lesson is kind of like a book chapter. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. We also have some animations, which are kind of cartoon drawings with some interactivity in them. And those we use to kind of help describe complex genetics examples or weed science principles. And those animation files have been downloaded over 68,000 times. So we have people from almost 180 countries now that come to the site. And so you can download those animations to your own computer, which works really well if people don't have a strong internet connection. And then we also have some peer review, which is important for a university setting. So we want to make sure the content is accurate scientifically, but also we want to make sure that it's developed in a way that helps students and learners understand the concepts. So we have both teachers as well as scientists review the materials. Okay, so the Plant and Soil Science eLibrary started back in 1999, and it started off with just a collection of these lessons and animations. So this one that I'm showing here is a weed science one. It was developed with a professor at Colorado State University. Each lesson, you can see, you can now rate it. So that way we can get a feeling from students and teachers which ones are really working well for them. And then there's an outline that kind of goes down the left-hand side here where if I were on the site, when you click on those, it would take you to different chapters within the eLibrary or within that lesson. Within each lesson, we also have hyperlinked glossary words. So when you click on the underlined word, then this glossary box will pop up. Now, the nice thing about this is all in a database. So when Scott defined this word, shikimic pathway, and then if there was another weed scientist that wrote a different lesson but also used the same word, then he could also hyperlink with just a click of a button to the same glossary definition. So what we were trying to do was share resources among all of the partners and the content authors. So where it made sense, we would share glossary words and share images as well. Okay, the animations then represent complex topics which are really hard for students to understand. But we would do some interactive drawings. When you click on them and go forward, then it'll like animate and you can actually see the process take place. You know, so sometimes it's hard for people to picture, especially molecular processes. So with these cartoon-like drawings that are interactive, then it helps visualize for them what that would look like. And then you can see in this particular example, then we've actually translated this one into Spanish. One lesson or animation like this costs probably $2,000 to $4,000 US to do, so it's quite expensive. But the translation part is relatively cheap, so it's just the graphic artwork that costs a lot of money. So once we have one animation done in one language, then it's not very expensive to just go ahead and translate the text into another one. So in that way, we're able to utilize the money a little bit better. I see Leanna has a question, so I'll wait before I go forward in case she's asking me a question. Who does the animation work? Oh, very good question. So what we've done here at the University of Nebraska is sometimes we use students to do some of the drawings, animation work. And what we found works the best is if you have someone who's a plant science student but also has artistic skills, because then they understand both the plant science or genetics concepts as well as able to draw them. That's not always possible to find someone like that, so when we don't, we'll work with our information technology groups. We've got a couple of them here on campus, and so we'll work with those students, but we just have to, what we call storyboard, we have to draw out each scene on paper for them, and then they can convert it into a nice drawing like what we see here on the page. But sometimes it's difficult for them because they don't understand the science concepts, so as instructors, then we have to make sure we really are careful to put all the detail in for the computer science student. These particular animations, most of them are done in Flash, and now with the iPhone and iPads not accepting Flash, then we're having to look at ways to convert these into more of an HTML5 kind of version. But HTML5 doesn't have all the capabilities that Flash does, so we really like using Flash better. Does that answer your question, Leanna? Or do you have something else you'd like to ask? Or anyone else? Okay, good. So yeah, if any of you are out there thinking of projects you might like to work on, I mean, let us know, because we work with folks all over the U.S. to put some of these projects together, and then we just host them all from the elibrary. And we can also put copies of them at other sites. So I think in one of my other slides I talk about how we share with Teachers Domain and the National Science Digital Library here in the U.S. And those are other collections of education resources that teachers like to use. What we find a lot here in the U.S. is there's a lot of emphasis like on biology, biochemistry, more of those kind of life sciences, but the applied agriculture sciences kind of get left out of education curriculum. So we'd like to be able to, when we create something like this, share it with other places so that other high school students or college students who aren't necessarily studying ag can get some exposure to some of the agriculture sciences, since there's such a great market right now for careers in those fields. Okay, so a lesson has usually a video clip or an animation. It has an interactive glossary, and then most of them also have a quiz. So in each quiz has maybe about 20 different quiz questions. When you click on an answer that you want and then click continue, you'll get a response that tells you why your answer was right or why it was wrong. So we try to write these quiz questions in a way that they're actually a learning tool as well, not just trying to give you a grade. And these are free for the public to use. Sometimes people like to do these just to do a self-assessment to see if they're understanding the material okay. And then sometimes we have teachers that will actually assign these as part of their class, and so they're part of a grade that the students will get. And then we also have another class of people who are working for certification, like a certified crop advisor. And so if they pass one of these quizzes, then they get a continuing education unit that counts towards their certification. So people use these in a lot of different ways. They kind of call this in education research a learning object. So it's like a small, portable education material or unit. And so what we find is that you might have two teachers that teach introductory genetics on each of their campuses, but they each teach it a little bit differently. So they like to have these materials, like with animation packages or quizzes or lessons. They like to package them in a little bit different order, or even use different lessons for their own particular class. So it makes it nice where we have these in pieces instead of a huge, large, like textbook or something. The pieces allow people to individualize what they want. Okay, so this kind of leads into my next slide here then. So in 1999, I couldn't quite understand why our computer programmer was making this into a database. At that point, I didn't even understand what databases were. They were just coming out, especially in the education arena. At that point, people were using HTML coding to put up their websites. So what this database allows us to do is we can go in behind the scenes and just kind of fill out a form of sorts. So it's really easy for us to put in as many lessons as we want, as many quizzes, and we don't have to keep going back to the programmer. We can put it in even though we don't know how to do any programming. So it was actually pretty brilliant for him to create that for us. And we also are using open source programming. So that means the programming that's behind the scenes in the elibrary is not proprietary, and so it can be shared as well as we can utilize any other open source tools that come out there as well. And there's pros and cons to that. The good thing is we're not tied to like a Blackboard type of product to where you can only use what they provide. On the flip side, we have to have our own programmer then to keep the database up to date or to fix any kind of bugs along the way. So we do like having this more individually drawn or directed kind of product. The other thing that has been nice about having it be open source is it's kind of what I'm calling a neutral zone. So since we have people in at least 15 different universities, 12 to 15, each of them use different course management systems like a Blackboard, WebCT, I think Lotus has one. And so what they do is they'll use their own course system that they're used to on their campus, but then they can just provide a link then back out to the eLibrary for their students to actually find the content. So in this way, we don't have to keep moving eLibrary lessons and animations around. They can just kind of reside in their own area, and then people can use them as they want to for whatever their needs are. We kind of had this philosophy of we want to go where our people are, so where our students, our farmers, research technicians that need this. So instead of just trying to build a site and then assume everyone will come to us, we try to also go to where there's other sites that are already well used. So like the teacher's domain that I mentioned before, National Science Digital Library, these are two pretty well-known sites for high school science teachers. So where possible, we try to link to them or even provide copies of our materials so they can show up there as well. And we're also working on some piloting with e-extension, so that would be more for like farmers and producers. Although there's a plant breeding and genomics community practice in the e-extension environment that's kind of geared towards advanced PhD professionals. So they'll also have webinars in there as well. So where our lesson materials make sense, and they're providing links back out to us. And then the other main thing is we've been successful with grant funding and industry partnerships. I think that's been a lot to do with that the site is open to the public, so you don't have to have a password to get into things, except for like the quizzes. There's no fee at this moment, so it really provides a larger impact that way. And that was just something that the faculty involved with the project felt pretty strongly about, since a lot of the support has come from grant funding. That's U.S. tax dollars, and so we just felt like we really owe it to the U.S. taxpayers to actually be able to use this product for free. So in the early days, as we were developing all this, we also involved some educational research projects. So Carol Spath, who hopefully can hear us now, she's having trouble with her sound, is one of the educational researchers who's done quite a bit of work with us. And so along the way, we've had a few grad students looking at just different aspects, trying to go a little bit deeper, like Carol Twig was suggesting, do more than just measure people's learning knowledge, but actually see how are they learning. And one of the things that we learned early on is that an individual lesson should just be about 15 to 30 minutes long, which equates to about 10 pages. And so what we were finding is that if it's longer than that, it's hard for people to stay focused for much longer. If you go into an hour, it's hard for them to really dive deep into the material without taking a break. So we found early then that a 15 to 30 minute length piece of material was actually the best. We also learned that we needed to direct the learners when they should access animations. So every lesson, or most of the lessons, have an animation associated with them. And in the early days, we just provided a link at the top of each lesson of where people could actually click on that link then to watch the animation. But we found that no one was looking at the animations. And after spending $4,000 to develop them, we were trying to figure out why that was. And the reason why it was is that the students, for them, all of the content provided was brand new. And so they didn't know when was an appropriate time for them, as they're reading through the lesson, when they should actually go look at the animation. So now what we do is, in the middle of the text, we'll say, okay, if this concept's unclear, we suggest you go look at this animation to help you. And after that, then the use of the animations has increased and people are really liking them. Another thing that we saw was with the quizzing. After a few years, we were sitting down and looking at the quiz data. So in order to take a quiz, people have an account and a password, and so we can kind of log their paths and see, how many times are they taking a quiz, how long does it take them to do a quiz, that kind of thing. And what was happening was that the professors who were assigning quizzes were telling the students they needed to get 8 out of the 10 questions right in order to get points that would count towards their grade in the class. But they could take the quiz over and over as many times as they wanted to until they got 8 out of 10 correct. Well, what we saw is that some students would go in, take the quiz, and maybe get 4 out of 10 points correct. And then 2 minutes later, they would take it again, and then they would get maybe 6 out of 10 questions correct. And usually there's a bank of questions, so each quiz they get is a little bit different. It's not the exact same questions. But what struck us as a little bit odd was why in just 2 minutes they were taking the quiz again. And then we realized that for a big chunk of the students, they weren't actually going back to look at the lesson to see, to look more at the concepts they were missing or try to learn the stuff better. So instead they were just doing the quiz over and over and not actually going to the lesson at all. So then that's when we realized that we needed to make sure the quiz questions were actually learning objects. So make sure they weren't just asking students to regurgitate information, but also have to think through the content and analyze it a little bit better. And then we saw, some students that it was obvious they would take the quiz and then they would go back and look at the lesson. So there were a different variety of approaches that students were taking to use these materials. And I think Carol was actually in the middle of this conversation that I can still picture. A whole bunch of us were around the table, and we had Carol, our educational researcher, we had a weed scientist, I think one of our genetic instructors were there, our programmer. We tried to involve the whole team, and as we were discussing it, we realized that there were just different approaches that people would take. And there was also a group of students that would get 10 out of 10 points right, and they would go back and do the quiz again. And so we were all kind of like scratching our head of, well, what's going on? And that's when Carol told us, you've got 3 different learning styles there. You've got surface learners who will just kind of breeze across the material and just do the bare minimum they need in order to get the grade or whatever it is that's motivating them. And then you've got these strategic learners who will dive a little bit deeper into the material. Maybe something catches their eye and they'll kind of spend some more time reading it. Or they'll look and see, they may be the folks that will do the quiz first to see what information they don't understand, and then they would go to the lesson to find that content and to learn it better. So they're very strategic in their approaches, but they want to kind of be, put in the minimal amount of work, but a little bit more than the surface guys. And then there was these other learners, so the folks that would do the quiz over and over even though they already got all the points. So those would be like the deep learners in there. So just to make sure you guys haven't gone asleep, since I can't see your eyeballs, let me bring up this other poll here. Okay. So my question is, what type of a learner do you think you are? Do you tend to be like a surface kind of learner, someone who will kind of skim the material so you can get done as soon as possible? Do you think you're more strategic? Kind of depend, you might go a little bit deeper, dig around if you need to. A deep person where you just kind of lose yourself on the web because you're looking at all the material that's available? Or does it kind of depend on the class or the subject matter that you're looking at? So I'll give you guys a minute or so here to vote. Okay, so looks like we have 14 of you have gotten in there. We've got 19 participants. So I'll wait a little bit here, see if someone else wants to go ahead and vote. Okay, so we got 16. All right, let me go ahead and close that. Looks like everybody's voted who wants to. So here's the results. So we've got one person that's more of a skimming kind of person, just kind of glide along, get what you need, and then get done. We've got about 5 of you who relate to being a strategic learner. So if you need to spend some extra time for it, you will. You'll dig into it, but you're not going to just go deep to go deep. And then the majority of you, it depends on the class or subject matter that you're in. And so this is interesting. I've got a few comments, but before I give you those, I want to bring up another poll. Okay, so on this one, what I want you to do is, let's see if I can make it bigger. Well, I'll just open it here. Okay, so now what I want you to do is, what kind of a learner do you think most professors are? Okay, so most of the professors that teach classes, where do you think they tend to fall? A surface learner, a strategic learner, a deep learner, or it could depend for them too, the class or subject matter. But in particular, for the class that they're teaching, where do you think they would fall at? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close. Looks like we got 17 of us in now. Okay, so let's compare our results. Okay, so within our group today, most of us, it depends on the class or subject matter. I have to admit, I'm kind of more of a strategic person. I kind of look to see, what I need to do. Maybe for a particular class, I'll go a little bit deeper, but I tend to be pretty strategic. And then we've got one person that identifies more with the surface learner. And then for our teachers, our group is saying most of our professors are probably strategic or deep learners. And in our conversation that we had with the group of us around the table, all of our professors definitely identified as being deep learners. And they just couldn't understand why they would have students that would just do a quiz question and then they wouldn't go to the lesson. Why would they just do the quiz and then maybe go to the lesson or not even go to the lesson at all? And so we had this long discussion of, well, does it really matter what your approach is? And we had these debates of, well, should we force all the students to do the lesson before they do a quiz? Do we do some programming in there that would force that? Or do we just let everyone find their own path? And thankfully, Carol could help us with that. And she's like, it is best for people just to find their own paths. If you can encourage, the surface or strategic folks, if they really need to get a little bit deeper to understand the concepts in the class, then we can use some tools to help encourage them to do that. But at the same time, knowing that they're going to maybe just do the quiz questions, then you write those quiz questions in a way that by just doing the quiz, they'll learn the content that they need to for that lesson. So I think it's really difficult sometimes for professors who are writing or developing these materials, because if they tend to be more of a deep learner, it's hard for them to realize that not all of their students are also deep learners. So what motivates them as a professor may be a little bit different than what motivates a student. So you have to remember to present material and content in a way that will be useful for all the different kinds of learners. Okay, let me go ahead. I'm going to close these. If you guys have some questions, now would be a great time to chime in with some before we switch topics a little bit. All right. Carol, are you able to hear me okay? I don't know if you had something else you might want to add about the different learning strategies. If I remember right, you'd found that animations really help the surface and strategic learner to comprehend material a little bit better. Yeah, okay. So Carol doesn't have a microphone. You can go ahead and type in the chat box if there's another point you'd like us to think about from your research. Okay, so Carol says the strategic are like gamers. They like to experiment with quiz questions. Then they form a strategy to learn. Ah, yeah. So that's kind of cool. You know, just in our earlier discussions with the professors, they would look at surface or strategic learners or surface learners as maybe lazy or something just because they were different. But it's just different approaches is all. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on with the next slide, but if you guys have questions, feel free to type in. I know sometimes there's a little bit of a delay here. Okay, so as I was putting this slide together, I realized, you know, okay, even at this point, we really haven't moved the ATM machine out of the bank. You know, we have, you know, some lessons and some animations and some quizzing, and there's a little bit of interactivity there with the content. But still, we're pretty typical, you know, where we have like a voiceover narrated PowerPoint, which would be like a lecture that a professor would give, you know, to a large class. We have lessons that you read in the animations, but there's still really no interaction then between, let's see if I can draw here. So we really don't have any interaction live going on between the professor and the students. Okay, it's still more just a one way where the material is coming out from the lesson or animation to the students, but they really aren't contributing towards the content here, and they definitely aren't interacting with each other within the group. So we're trying to figure out how can we then utilize this online technology to help foster things that we can't do on face-to-face classes. So I'm curious for you guys, just to give you a little bit of interaction opportunity here. What kind of ideas do you have on how we can actually move that ATM machine out? How do we utilize online technologies in ways that we maybe aren't yet, or able to do things that we can't do online? Do you have any ideas? And I'll wait a little bit here, give you a chance to type in. And if you don't have any, that's okay. I've got a couple ideas I'm going to share with you that we've been trying with the elibrary. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody's, oh, Deana's typing, so let me give her a second. And Arabi's typing, cool. So I'm looking for ideas that you guys maybe have or other experiences you've had on where distance ed technology is like moving out. Okay, so Deana 2N says, how about using rooms like this for a professor-student interaction? Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. You know, like a live setting like this gives you opportunities, you know, to interact with me. And so that's kind of fun. Something that we've done to in larger settings is we can actually break the students into different rooms within this environment. So like I could break you up into groups of 4 or 5, and you could have some interaction with each other and then come back together. And that's something you can't do very easily in a big lecture hall setting. Amy has an idea. What about using webcams for virtual field trips, like a winter nursery in Puerto Rico? Ah, that would be sweet. You know, so you could see different parts of the world that you couldn't do from your normal classroom, but through the live webcam, you can actually connect with people and see their environment. That'd be really cool. And see different crops maybe that you aren't used to seeing. Okay, looks like Arabi maybe has an idea as well. Okay, and their idea is the students can access information on their own time. Ah, yeah, that's a big key. We get a lot of feedback on how they really like that. A lot of students who are working or simply have a required course at the same time as a lecture can still easily access the online material. Yep, exactly. I hear a lot of people say that, you know, that distance isn't just because they're physically located away from the university. It's also because they may have a time commitment at that time that the class exists. So by having it online, they can watch it whenever they want. We've also found that we do a lot of classes where you have on-campus and online students learning together. And we find that the on-campus students like the online lectures as well, because they can go back and listen to the lectures as many times as they want, or rewind. You know, maybe there's a section of the PowerPoint that was just really confusing for them, so they can go back to it and watch it again. Where before, without distance technologies, you couldn't have done that. You maybe would have a tape recorder, you know, at the classroom, but that would have been the extent of it. Right, these are great ideas. Well, let me go ahead and share with you a couple that I've had. One thing, let's see here. Try to figure out how to move this. Oh, I know, it's because of my drawing. Okay, just a second here. There we go. Okay, so one thing that we have done, I have a student that just graduated a couple of years ago, Robert Vavala. He did his master's degree with us. And what he did some research on is he realized that community is an important factor for people to really be able to learn. And the research he'd found was based on face-to-face classes, so our typical on-campus kind of courses. And the research was showing that within a classroom setting, if people feel a sense of community with each other, then they will actually learn more than if it was an environment that's more antagonistic. Or, you know, as you think back of the teachers that you really liked, you know, those teachers who were really maybe warm and approachable, who would encourage people to ask questions. In those kind of settings, you tend to learn more. So what he was curious was, you know, is there a way for community to form online, you know, or does it form online? And we have 3 professors at the University of Nebraska that were each teaching different introductory science courses. But each of these 3 instructors were teaching their class on campus to face-to-face students, and they were teaching it online. And the online and the face-to-face students weren't interacting with each other. They were like 2 different sections. So what Robert did was looked at, you know, how is community in these different classes. And it turns out, this is just a press release from his research. For whatever reason, his findings just went viral on the web. It turns out his paper was like one of the top 150 stories from the University of Nebraska back in 2010. And I think what caught people's attention is that part of his study showed that the students had the same grades, whether they were on campus or if they were online. Which, you know, we know from Carol Twig's comments that we already know that. So we just had a baseline of that. But I think for some reason that was still a novel idea for the general public. So I think that's why Robert's paper went wild. But for us, what we really liked about it is this kind of data here. So he used a survey that broke community down into 2 different kind of topics. So there was a connectedness measurement for community. And by that, the authors had defined that as like community spirit, trust, cohesion. So kind of the warm, fuzzy feelings that we have of community. You know, we feel like we're part of a group or a family. So that's part of community. But then the authors, it was Rovey, is who actually published the survey. So what they also did is they defined a second part of community as learning community. And that would be when you feel like you're in a group that has a shared educational goal. Or do you feel like because you're in this class, you are benefiting from being in the class because you're all learning the same stuff. So it's more dealing with the content and this similar kind of mission, not necessarily the warm, fuzzy feelings. Okay, and so what he found is that in our face-to-face students, their overall community came out to 58.1 was their total score, and then the online students was a little bit less, 55.24. So for us, right there at that point, it was kind of interesting because we knew the face-to-face students, the online students had the same grades at the end, but yet community was a little bit less of a value there on the online students. So what we want to do then is we went to the different subgroups. So we looked at the connectedness feeling. And so we compare the face-to-face students was a 31, and then the online students was 29. And those are statistically significant, so different. So the online students didn't feel the same kind of warm, fuzzy connection as the face-to-face students did with each other, which probably makes sense because this kind of technology can be a little bit, you know, it's kind of hard to really get to know each other. Like even now we can't see each other and see our reactions and that kind of thing. So it's kind of hard to feel that kind of warm, fuzzy connection. But then when we look at the learning scale, we see that it was virtually the same. Okay, so this wasn't significantly enough to be higher for the online students of the face-to-face. So it was nearly the same. So as far as the community in the sense of feeling like you as a group have the same educational goals, that you're benefiting from being together as a group and learning, that was the same online as it was face-to-face. So the thing that Robert and I, as we were looking at this, we wondered if there were ever a way to help make the online environment allow for the connectedness, community kind of feelings. I wonder if in the end that would improve learning then with our distance students. And so it still kind of goes back to Carol Twig's idea of how do you get the ATM machine out of, the bank. So those are some things that we're trying to work on. So one thing we thought about, well, how can we create community? Could one way be with Facebook and Twitter? Yeah. And those have fallen flat. We found that Facebook and Twitter work really great for making announcements, but as far as trying to create a community kind of feeling, it doesn't work very well. Because for people, Facebook is more of their personal space, not their professional space. So what we've done is in the elibrary, trying to create those kind of Facebook-like features within it to kind of foster community. So we've got different, we're calling networking groups or learning communities. This is one for pesticide resistance management. So we've got some folks that are all working on developing different lessons. We've got a group here that are on one grant who are working on lessons and animations that will all go towards this community. Amy has been working with a couple of our online master students who are also writing lessons that will go into the community. And then Deana and Amy actually work with all these people, but she's also been working with yet another group of people here that are on another grant. So, and this is actually an international grant, so they're also contributing materials. So this group is definitely feeling like a learning sense of community. Okay, so they're all working towards the same kind of goal. Within the elibrary, you can just package materials together. So this is an example of a high school science class where Sid Reedy has just gone through the elibrary, picked out the lessons and animations he wants for his students, and so it just makes it easier for them. Now all of his students are all in the same classroom and face-to-face setting, so they're not going to be interacting with people online, although through the elibrary now they could do that if we wanted to. And we have a 4-H community where people are, at this point, kind of just sharing materials, not yet really working together as a community, other than just as a repository. And then the Plant Breeding Training Network, which I think most of you are familiar with. One thing I was going to point out, if you do not have an account with the Plant and Soil Science eLibrary, if you just go to the main page and click on FAQ button, let me get my arrow back here. So if you click on the FAQ section there, then you can get to the document we have on how to create an account. So you can do that, and that way you can get automatic announcements for these kinds of webinars. And afterwards, after this webinar, we can kind of walk you through that too. The nice thing about the Learning Network or other communities is we have then a members list. And in that list, then you can get a sense for who all is part of that group. So this is just a quick screenshot of the different students that are involved in the Plant Breeding Training Network. And you can see just there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different universities involved. So to me, this is a way of doing something online that we couldn't do face-to-face. So we couldn't have had all these universities working together in a live kind of setting before, and some interactions. In the Plant Breeding Training Network, we've got webinars such as this one. We record them and make them available for people to watch later. And then we also have some lectures that people do that are part of classes or just for speakers for any other kind of setting. So those are all there. And then you can also participate live in the courses. And we've also added this discussion board. And this has been a nice kind of addition where people can start to talk about some of their research. So on this one that I've highlighted, early in the fall, there was a new instrument some of the students were using within the TCAP project. So through this discussion board, they were able to share ideas and strategies on how to better use the equipment. So we're hoping this kind of activity will be able to be used by students. And part of my goal, too, is that even after people graduate, they can keep coming to the PBTN as they go through their careers just to continue to learn new things and to bounce ideas off of each other where it seems appropriate. Now for future kind of things, I just put up a couple of projects I wanted to highlight. This is Scott Nissen. Again, he's a weed scientist out of Colorado State University. He's been part of the elibrary since the beginning. And what he is doing, he has some colleagues that are in Brazil. So he's working with them to translate more materials into Portuguese. So some of the stuff we've already written in English, they're going to be doing it in Portuguese. And he also has a colleague at Puerto Rico who we've been working with who will be teaching. He's kind of put a package together for his class there in Puerto Rico using the same materials. And then Scott is also working with some colleagues in Australia who are going to be working on developing new materials down the road. So what we like about this e-library concept is then people can just work on things that are in their particular area of expertise, but then share it with each other. So we're not reinventing the wheel over and over. This is Rainin. He is out of University of Costa Rica. He's also a weed scientist, and he's been doing some of the translations that we have in Spanish. And he cracks me up. Just a week or two ago, he contacted me and he said, Deana, can we use some of our grant money to buy this little projector gadget which will connect to my iPhone? So turns out what he wants to do. So he's at Costa Rica. So he has been asked by Intel and I think the U.S. Embassy to give a talk using like technology. And what he's going to be doing is literally, he said, riding a horse into the jungles of Costa Rica to meet with some native people there. And they're wanting to provide like a cell phone app for them to help them identify some of their endangered plant species. And so they have cell phone access. And so by using this little gadget here with a projector, he can give a talk to them, show them some of the materials from the e-library. And we're also hoping that he'll be able to give us a webinar like we're doing here today from the middle of Costa Rica out to us so that we can get a feeling for what the work he's doing there in Costa Rica. So I'm really excited about it. I think this is just a really great way to tie different parts of the world together that we can all grow from. And then, to me, this is the exciting part, too. So I'm back to Sid Reedy. He's one of our high school teachers that's using the this e-library site. So this is his high school here in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. All you see are wheat fields and corn fields. Well, not wheat, I guess all corn and soybeans around there. And his students, who have probably never left Nebraska in their lives, through the e-library, they're going to have connections with colleagues and peers in Costa Rica and Brazil and Australia. And so they can really get an awareness of kind of global situations and really kind of learn from that as well as participate to kind of solve some of the problems. And so through those kind of interactions, that's where we're hoping that we'll see some more community development and learning really start to escalate. And with that, that's all I have. I don't know if you had any other questions in general or comments or other ideas you have that we can really harness the potential of online technologies. I'll go ahead and give you guys a second to type in any comments or questions that you have. Thanks, Jamie. I see she had an applause there. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. If any of you would like us to show you how to get an account in the e-library, just let us know here in the chat box. We can stop the recording. If there aren't any other questions, we can show you how to get logged in. And that way you'll get automatic emails whenever we have any kind of webinars that are offered through the Plant Breeding Training Network or through the elibrary in general. And I'd just like to thank you all for coming. It's been a lot of fun. Duke is typing. Cool. You're welcome. And just seeing Duke's name there reminded me, if any of you are TCAP grad students and are interested in helping Catherine with this seminar series, be sure to pop her a quick email. She's trying to get the committee together and organized a little bit more, so she'd love to hear from you. All right, thanks again, everyone, and enjoy your spring. I'll put my email address here in case you have questions later, or if you have some interest in partnering with us a little bit more. And we'll try to announce future webinars to the same locations, like so through Facebook and Twitter